Hi, my name is Caroline, and I am the podcast director of the Brown Political Review Multimedia Board. I wanted to highlight an insightful interview that will be in our upcoming podcast episode on the current status of higher education amidst attacks from multiple sources. One of our podcast leads, Erin Ozyurek, had the opportunity to speak with Zander Moricz, the founder and executive director of the Social Equity Through Education Alliance. Currently on a gap year from Harvard University, Zander took the opportunity to create SEE Space Sarasota in his hometown to encourage youth organizing and advocacy. You may have seen Zander on the recent Jubilee video, One LGBTQ+ activist versus 25 conservatives. We are very excited to have him on the podcast. Take it away, Erin.
To start off, could you talk a bit about what SEE Alliance is, how it came to be, and what kinds of work the organization has been involved in?
I would love to do that. I would love to tell you. So SEE Alliance is the Social Equity Through Education Alliance, and we are a youth-led multi-generational movement focused on building a long-term civic power through local organizing, especially at the school board level. We're building the infrastructure that turns everyday people into long-term organizers and voters, starting at that local level. I founded SEE Alliance as a club at my high school as a result of the very different and very important experiences I had in my different public schools. I've been in public schools for the entirety of my K through 12 education, and I switched from Manatee County to Sarasota County, and with that saw a huge difference in the resources provided, the student makeup, the instructional quality, and SEE Alliance and the relationships I built through founding this club, which eventually became an organization, was my answer as a student to the question of what can we do? What should we do? Why is the public education system such a disaster? And at the same time, I saw a lot of traditional political engagement wasn't working for young people. Their traditional party structure offered very limited, very stagnant opportunities for high schoolers to get involved. And I clearly felt that there needed to be a way for high schoolers to be not just witnessing the conversation or participating in a conversation that had already been written, but leading the conversation and contributing to the direction and trajectory of the greater civic movement. And SEE Alliance allowed for me and to my friends, and eventually over the course of 3 years, 2,000 other high schoolers in Florida to do the same.
Awesome. So obviously you're based in Florida, you started in Florida, and you've spent years organizing around education within the state. From your perspective, what's the current state of education in Florida right now?
What is going on? That's such a good question. The state of public education in Florida is abysmal. It is being attacked from so many different angles. And I think right now in 2026, we are witnessing the culmination of efforts that have been building over the last decade. I think that the greater crisis is the attempt to eliminate public education as a principal system in our country. We have a greater effort to eliminate government involvement in our lives, and that makes sense. People do not trust the government. People do not like the government. I am one of those people. But when it's applied to public education and public education is treated like a bloated social program, which it is not, what we have are a lot of people that can be sold on the idea of tax elimination and no big government, now being sold on the idea that public education is not a prerequisite to democracy, which it is, right? There is not a single democracy in the entire world throughout all of history that has ever survived the loss of public education. So when I think about the state of public education in Florida, the things that probably come to mind are book bans and Don't Say Gay and the culture war issues around parental rights in education, from COVID masking through the erasure of Black history to now. And those fights are incredibly important and have dramatically reshaped the work that I do and the reality of public education, but they are a distraction from the real crisis facing public education broadly and facing public schools immediately here in Florida, which is the privatization movement that has harnessed these culture war issues, that has harnessed the real grounded concern of parents and manipulated that, used that to fund efforts to shut down and weaken public schools such that the public system is viewed as a weak failure of an option, and therefore all families with enough money or families that have enough agency or families that are tapped into their children's lives and have the ability to do so will then move their children to charter schools and private schools or homeschool them. And that continues to pull people away from the public option and continues to weaken the public option. And so we get to continue to say public schools suck, public schools are terrible. And that continues to be true because we are fulfilling the prophecy by draining it of its resources and draining it of its families until eventually we have such a weak system that is used only by our families that have no other choice, which are the same families that are going to have the hardest time harnessing power from the political system, turning out and registering to vote, or being involved in the government process. Eventually, when just those families are left using the public system, it's very easy for the billionaires that are driving this movement and the politicians that are paid for by them to say, okay, time to eliminate the public school system.
It seems like young people are frequently the subjects of education debates, but from what I've seen at least, are rarely the ones making the decisions or taking a part in these discussions. How does that disconnect shape policy outcomes? And do you think that young voters are becoming a more powerful force in this realm of policy?
I love that question. Yes. First of all, I do think that young voters and student voters are becoming increasingly important in school board elections, particularly the ones that Sea Alliance is organizing, because we're focusing on getting our students involved. I think that whether or not we recognize it at scale, student voters and young voters have a critical role to play in our school board elections. And if we are able to tap in this portion of our population to what's going on, they have every ability, every right, and every opportunity to lead education policy forward. And to me, that's incredibly exciting because to the question you asked, there is a tremendous disconnect between the education policy that's being prioritized by school board members and legislators and the policy that our students, parents, and teachers are currently begging for. What our students, parents, and teachers need is not a mystery, and it is not being poorly communicated. It is being shouted from the rooftops, it's being pleaded for, and it's being reasonably framed across the country. We see our teachers, our parents, and our students all cry out about the conditions of their public schools, about the quality of their education, and the things that they want to see change as a result. That is not being connected to the actual policy conversations because our school board elections remain the least participated in elections across the country, and school board governance is the least participated in form of local government. We do not have broad community awareness about what's happening to our public schools or what's happening within them. And so it really is a small group of people in every school district that is deciding what is happening along with the school board members. So if we are able to broadly activate the families, the students, the teachers, the people that are most directly impacted by what's happening in the public schools, then we are going to be able to create community movements that start to generate the outcomes that the communities want to see. And that's the brilliance of school board organizing, is we're not competing with these massive PACs and billions of dollars and Fox News, Donald Trump's Twitter, and Elon Musk, right? We're not fighting with those massive power players the same way that we are in a congressional race, the same way we are in a lot of gubernatorials, the same way we are in the presidential, right? At a school board level, not only are the majority of elections nonpartisan throughout the country, but there isn't the same political machine surrounding them. With things like Moms for Liberty and Proud Boys, we started to see the true emergence of that political infrastructure, but it is already dying out. The founding Moms for Liberty chapter has shut down. In 2022, the majority of Moms for Liberty-backed school board candidates won. In 2024, the majority lost. The swing of the pendulum has not been generous, has not been kind to Moms for Liberty, and they're not here to stay. They're already not here. So there really is a lot of opportunity for students, parents, and teachers to drive the outcomes they want to see at the school board level. And if we're able to do that at the school board level and start to build that awareness, build that momentum, build that power, that can be done at the state level too by connecting and organizing those local community movements. So that's what we're doing here in Sarasota. We have a strategy that's focused at the school board level where we have the most power and we're able to generate the most results, but it connects to a statewide strategy where we need to be shifting statewide policy as well, because what we're seeing doesn't reflect what our communities need. And I think when we see such huge disconnects, the question is always why, right? Why are our politicians, why are our lawmakers doing things that are so starkly contrasted with what our communities need? The answer is always money. The answer is always money. This is not me being cynical. This is not me using some random social justice talking point. I think at this point, we all know billionaires are bad, but I'm not just pointing to some random billionaires in the billionaire clouds and saying it's them. There are explicitly billionaires that are running the institutions that are authoring things like Project 2025, that are authoring documents that explicitly state that they would like to see the end of public education and are investing into charter school operators as a result, right? So when we have things like billionaire land developers initiate public education projects that give them full ownership of land that our public schools are currently on, we have to start asking those critical questions, and we start to see the connections between money and the decisions of our lawmakers. What we have to do is leverage what we have against what they have, such that at critical pressure points, we're able to move power and win. Those critical pressure points are our elections, and what we have is the majority. We have the majority of human beings in this country and voters in our districts that want to see stronger public schools and want to see increased investments into public education. 75% of all voters, Democrats, Republicans, independents, all want to see increased investments into public education. When you boil that down to just parent voters, the majority of Republican parent voters, the majority of Democrat parent voters, and the majority of independent parent voters all want to see increased investments into their public schools. So across the board, when we focus on something like public education, something that is so universally important to our families, so fundamental to the experience of American lives, then we are able to distill away from lots of the cultural war issues that separate us and focus on the meat, the potatoes, the bread, the butter, which are open public schools that function.
Can you talk a bit about what C Alliance is working on right now, midterms on our terms, and what the vision behind that movement is?
Yes. So for the last 2 years, we've been building MOOT, midterms on our terms, which is our movement for 2026 to put the midterm elections on our terms and in our hands. This is a focused effort to primarily turn out voters for targeted school board races here in Florida. However, it's also a national movement that is harnessing the effort of organizers across the country to not only focus in on their school boards, but to leverage their energy back to the target districts that we've selected in Florida so that we can prove a case study of what we're doing here. Because if we can prove that school board organizing works in Florida, then we can prove that school board organizing works in Georgia, in New York, in California, in Texas, in any state that you want. Because if you start in the trench, you can fill the bench. And that's what we are doing with midterms on our terms. What midterms on our terms aims to do is organize communities from the summer of 2025 through August of 2026, such that disenfranchised voters aren't being asked 1 or 2 weeks out from the election to turn out to vote, but rather are being sustainably engaged for the year leading up to it, so that we actually have a chance at turning out new voters and turning out voters to think in new ways. In the state of Florida, we cannot win the majority of our elections by targeting a small portion of voters that we view as value aligned and then hoping that somehow that number is bigger than the other number we know is out there. The majority of the work that needs to be done in Florida is about re-educating voters and accessing voters that do not vote yet. That's a much more complicated job than just standard voter turnout work. And so by centering it in our school board organizing and then making that work hyper local, we're able to bring it back to those shared values that we talked about. So distilling away from everything that flames people up, focusing in on what brings us together. And the work is voter turnout organizing and community education. This really looks like mobilizing people to go to school board meetings, supporting them and preparing them to deliver public comments, and then supporting the narrative work around that, whether it be social media or press. The reason this is a really strong and necessary part of the effort is it starts to develop community awareness and community conversations, which we are able to prove with a strong data correlation increases voter turnout for those races because people are talking about them, they're thinking about them. There is some really strong data that actually shows if school board politics shows up in the local newspaper in your community, that community will have a stronger voter turnout in August. So building the conversations early, building that resonance, building that awareness, that's one part of the midterms and our terms movement. The other part is voter conversations. So we are reaching out through phone banking, text banking, and door knocking to do intensive voter conversation work. We are also running ad campaigns through Meta and through various display and television platforms. The greater effort of midterms and our terms is to build a youth-led, multi-generational, data-driven effort to turn people out for school board elections. And when I say that, the question I get most often is, why do you focus on school board elections? Why focus on something so granular and so specific at a time where... That was going to
be my next question.
Boom, you get it. At a time where everything feels like it's collapsing and failing. And what I will say is that we have done focus groups and polling and surveys and so much inquiring of the American populace as to why people, particularly young people, are not turning out to vote. And what we found is that people care, people are aware, people understand how politics impacts their daily lives, people understand how politics is broken, people deeply empathize with what needs to change, and still they are not turning out to vote. So what we have here is not an empathy problem, is not an education problem, is not an awareness problem. What we have here is a disenfranchisement problem. What we heard back from the majority of voters is that they decided not to vote in their previous election because they didn't believe that their vote could make a difference. What we hear from people that say they care about politics but have never attended a protest, never gone to a government meeting, never voted in their lives, is that they deeply believe that their voice, their presence, their engagement cannot make a difference. And so when we're looking at critical elections, what we're seeing is that the majority of eligible voters who are not turning out to vote for these elections, their reason for not turning out to vote is a belief that their vote doesn't matter. It's not a lack of education. It's not a lack of awareness. It's not a lack of care. That's the most important thing for me to articulate to people, because if we understand that the majority of people aren't turning out to vote because they believe that their vote and voice doesn't matter, then suddenly we understand that our job isn't to make young people or all people care about democracy or about elections, but rather to help them understand that they can make a difference. And so instead of us telling millions of people, trust me, bro, you can make a difference, vote and see it later, instead of asking for people's trust, we put people in positions where they see that their voice matters and that their participation matters, so that they will stay sustained in that engagement. And the easiest place for us to do that is our school board elections. Because there is so little current engagement and involvement in school board organizing and in school board politics, we see that a small focus group of people can immediately disrupt the operations of a school board and immediately generate conversation around the failures of a school board. So what we see is that if you can get a community member or a voter to engage in school board politics or engage in a conversation at the school board level, they become significantly more likely to participate in politics at every level and turn out to vote at every level, because they started somewhere that they saw that their participation made a difference. So by getting people started at the school board level, we are able to change outcomes across the government.
I don't want to take up any more of your time. I just have one last question with a follow-up. When you think about the future of public education in America, and especially within the context of today's political moment, what worries you the most? And then my follow-up is going to be, what gives you the most hope?
What worries me most about our current political moment is more and more people are choosing to educate themselves about the issues, but they see that as their contribution to organizing, not doing something with that education. So people are confusing awareness with action and not going beyond that. And then the second problem is that we as organizers and organizations and nonprofits see this, but aren't meeting people where they're at and effectively plugging them in. We as movements are still vaguely throwing out, find an organization near you and get involved. Talk to a neighbor, talk to a friend, attend a protest, go to an event, make a voter guide. What do those things mean? What event? Event to do what? Event to go where? What organization? Organization that does what? Voter guide how? Like, none of these calls to action are real. And I don't think we as organizers can reasonably expect for people to start leading a movement without any support or any education or any resources. And that combined problem is my biggest concern.
And what gives you the most hope?
The people that I work with. I will take my headphones off for 30 seconds and I'll hear around the corner Zaire welcoming a 15-year-old into the movement who was inspired by something they saw on Instagram and have decided that now is their time to be involved. And then 30 minutes later, I'll hear from Cassandra that an 82-year-old retired teacher who has been too worried about politics since Trump first took office, felt brave because of a C student fellow who knocked on their door and is now deciding to re-enter the work. And moments like that are so inspiring. And I want more people to be exposed to how much good is happening and how many wonderful people are doing wonderful things. And that only happens when people step into movement work, even if it's just for 2 hours a month. Being connected to communities like C, I have watched change people's lives, and it has absolutely changed mine. And I think it's a very generative and healing experience. So I invite people to recognize that when a bad thing happens, there's only 3 things they can do. They can ignore that the bad thing is happening. They can learn about the bad thing and try to hide from it, or they can face that bad thing head on. And I encourage as many people to join the third as possible, because once you do, and once you start doing what you can, you realize that there's no point in being anxious on top of doing what you can. And it's a very liberating, very grounding feeling.
Thanks for listening to this highlight of the BPR Multimedia Podcast. To listen to the full upcoming episode, find us wherever you listen to your podcasts.